maybe because the show has evolved over 10 years. Hello everyone. Welcome to the spoiler room. It's our final perfect 10 episode. We've been celebrating 10 years of podcasting, which I never thought I'd be saying in my entire life when I first started doing these on really horrible Google Hangouts back in the day with the lag and it was bad. It was howdy. But I did it on a fluke. And here we are 10 years later, and I'm still doing it. And I have some wonderful folks with me tonight for this episode to where we're talking about another film as we have for our Perfect 10 series, films that were celebrating their 10th anniversary all year. We've been doing that all year, and we're doing it today. And yeah, we are looking at Carrie remake from 2023. Look at Ian's already shivering. We aren't even into it yet, and Ian's already like sitting there shivering over this idea.
The good news, Ian, is you have to compare it to the original Carrie, so we can talk about the original Carrie a lot more if we want to. We can sort of sneak around Mark's premise.
They say boys don't cry, but you might see some tears from me tonight.
Wow.
Ooh, that's piercing the discussion right off the bat.
So thank you everyone for venturing down the stairs, pulling up a chair and grabbing your favorite drink with us as we talk movie spoilers. And yes, you heard all these wonderful dulcet tones who join me. I surround myself with people who are smart to make me feel better about myself. And one of those people, one of the two tonight with us, is none other than Mr. Jeff York of The Establishing Shot. He's back with us. Hello, Jeff. How are you?
Hello.
Sir?
Great, Mark. Great to be with you again. And Ian, if it's not on your show, it's next to you or on top of you. And with Mark, it's awesome, so to speak. Anyway, both of you, friends, Romans, countrymen, and great podcast hosts.
If you're going to be on Ian, we're going to leave that for the Patreon. If you're going to be on top of him, okay,
his name does suggest a mattress.
It does. It does suggest a mattress. Simmons mattress. It's a very comfy one.
Sorry, Ian.
Look, he keeps coming, and the man who keeps coming back for more, though he questions it every week. I think
he hasn't heard that one in eons. Dare I say?
Eons.
Oh, enough of the puns.
It's enough of the puns. It is Mr. Ian Simmons and kicking the seat. Hello, Ian.
My apologies, Ian.
I'm just
sorry.
Wow. Hey,
where do you go from there?
Gonna talk about the Carrie make.
You thought Carrie was going to get it.
So yes, Carrie, 2013 version, the remake that they had with Julianne Moore and Chloe Grace Moretz playing the Whites, and Mr. Jeff York. Why don't you give the synopsis? Now we want a sitcom. You just pictured a 90s sitcom called The Whites with these two, right?
No, I thought you were getting some like a weird racial jag. Julianne Moore and Chloe Grace Moretz playing The Whites, and then over across the wrong side of the tracks, you got
the new dark comedy from NBC is called The Whites. And that's the least interesting of the whole story. It's based on the Stephen King bestseller, which was really his kind of first big bestseller in the early 70s, about a misfit teen who's picked on at school, and she's odd, and she's kind of not very well adaptive to what is, the social kind of mores of high school, because she lives in a very sheltered home with a religious zealot of a mother, and kind of a very limited world experience. And it's about her kind of maturation as a girl into a woman, personified by the very beginning, where she has her period and doesn't realize what it is because her mother hasn't told her anything about reproduction. And it just kind of adds to the infamy of Carrie in the school of being this quirky, crazy, odd character that in those days, there wasn't really the room as much as there is now for a lot of different kinds of stripes, I guess, if you will. And the film gets its horror from the fact that Carrie has kind of a nice tool in her arsenal for revenge, and that is she has telekinetic powers, and she can move things across the room. and sort of use that in some respects to manifest her rage and her anger and stuff. She can't do much. She can't really lash out in the typical way that she may want to, or a teen boy could. But as this kind of sheltered teen, this is her sort of go-to superpower in a way, where she can sort of get back at some of her tormentors and at least keep some of the problems from becoming worse for her. Though ultimately at the end of it, when she's ridiculed in the prom, where she was sort of trumped up to become the prom queen just so they could dump a bucket of blood on her and humiliate her, the throwback to her getting her period during the shower the phys ed class sort of comes full circle. She wreaks havoc on the entire school, and in the original book, the entire town burns to the ground. I don't remember if they did as much of that here, though. She burns certainly more places. Her path of destruction is certainly more fleshed out here. And that's one of the things I think they did do pretty well about this. And they made it much more about her mother, too, where there's a lot more about the girls in high school in the Brian De Palma 1976 version. But essentially, that's the spoiler room in a nutshell story,
Nice.
if you will.
Nice.
That I think they did it to probably give it a little bit more of a, dare I say, feminist bent, because Kimberly Pierce, who did Boys Don't Cry, as Ian referenced in the first seconds, directed it. It's one of only 3 big films she's directed. And it starred 2 very popular actors of the modern era, Chloe Grace Moretz and Julianne Moore. And I think they both did admirable jobs here, but we'll get into that. I just don't know if ultimately they erased anyone's memory of the Oscar-nominated and sort of iconic performances that were created by Sissy Spacek and Piper Laurie in the 76 original.
Well done. Well done.
Well, thank you. It's a little long,
Bravo.
but I'll shut up for a few minutes and let others talk.
So, Ian, when this came out, when you first saw it, you didn't like it? You still don't like it? Really?
Here's the thing. Mark, I'm going to ask you the question that I always ask whenever we talk about these kinds of movies. And the answer is always no. But I'm hoping maybe there's a chance. Have you read Carrie, the Stephen King novel?
I have not.
Okay. I give it, Jeff, did you read it?
I did. Oh, yeah. I read it in high school.
I give it my highest recommendation. It really does feel like it doesn't feel like a Stephen King book, but it feels exactly like a Stephen King book because it's so odd in its presentation that I was hoping that the 2013 movie would adapt the novel instead of just being a remake of the Brian De Palma film. And it's like the very last scene of the movie gives an inkling as to what the novel was about, which is basically the novel is it's almost like Oppenheimer. It's like committee hearing testimony, newspaper clippings, accounts, interviews of what happened with, Carrie White and her mother, and that all centered around this weird event where all these kids died in this prom fire. But it ended up just being the De Palma remake. There's 2 good scenes I think that they added to the remake that weren't in the original. One of them I'm completely blanking on. I have to look at my notes, but one of them is Chris Hargensen, who's the school bully. He was really picking on Carrie, has it out for her. At one point, she is, she quits gym class because the teacher basically says, a bunch of the girls ganged up on Carrie in the opening of the film, did some horrible things to her in the shower. And the coach finds out about it, and she's like, okay, I want everybody to confess or to come forward and tell me what really happened. If you don't, then you have to do laps, essentially. And Chris basically stages a revolt on the football field and says, no, we're not doing this. You can't expel all of us. And the gym teacher's like, look, you're not going to prom. Get out of my class, yada, yada, yada. So the new addition in this film is a scene where Chris brings her dad to the principal's office, and her dad, you get the feeling, is this high-powered lawyer, played by the guy who played Ellis in Die Hard.
Yeah.
That's right.
I recognized it. I was trying to recognize his face. I didn't look him up, but I'm like, oh yeah, look at that.
This is like if that guy hadn't had his brains blown out by Hans Gruber and he had a daughter, 20 years later. But It's great because you get the idea that he's a kind of like a sleazeball who's, not averse to throwing his weight around in defense of his daughter, but then he quickly realizes that his daughter's actions are indefensible. And it's a really nice, tense scene that gives him insight into why Chris might be so messed up. Doesn't make her sympathetic exactly, but it's at least an explanation. I'm like, oh, this really is something here. The other scene also involves Chris at the end when she and her boyfriend get killed by Carrie in a car. The car kind of falls forward, driving forward through the air of this force field. Chris goes up into the windshield, and when we stop, we see the after effects of her, like half of her face is through the shattered glass, and we see her die. There's a nice digital effect of like the spirit leaving her eyes. Her lenses go gray. It's nice. It's a great touch, but the rest of the movie is just a soulless, style-free, CGI enhanced. Hey, look, we can make the bed float and books fly around like it's Poltergeist version of Brian De Palma's movie, and realize just how much flair De Palma brought to this story that it's just, there's no reason to watch this movie except to really admire the original.
Wow. And Jeff, how do you feel? Am I going to be the only one who kind of enjoyed this film?
You know what? It's one of those movies where, and there's a couple sort of parallel threads here almost. Chloe Grace Moretz got into this sort of period where she was like the go-to person to remake these really terrific films that were not terrible, but sort of, why is this trip really necessary kind of remake. She was also the young child vampire in the American version of Let the Right One In, which was not a bad American version. If you had just seen that and never saw the original Swedish version, you might come away and go, that was pretty interesting. And I'm not sure why they went to Chloe Grace Moretz. Maybe there weren't too many young actresses at that time, or because she was willing to do Hit Girl in Kick-Ass, they figured, well, she's willing to do edgy, controversial material. Or whatever.
I wouldn't doubt it that either she was or she proved that whoever, if her parents are her managers, would allow her to do that material.
Yeah, let's do her the edgier, bigger role, so she's just not the girlfriend kind of stuff.
Right.
But when I watch a movie like this, I always ask myself, why is it being done? There's so many inferior movies or bombs that they could have remade that would have been better, as opposed to trying to remake a classic. But I also think, you see where the filmmakers and even the actors and actresses in this one, some of them are very good. Judy Greer, I think, is actually an improvement upon Betty Buckley, who wasn't bad in the original Carrie, but Judy Greer is maybe a little more sympathetic, and they flesh her out a little bit more here. That's one of those places where I think Kimberly Pierce, the director of Boys Don't Cry, maybe added some dimension to the female characters that were in support like that. But I'm always aware of the fact that they're going out of their way to modernize it and add shit just because they can. To your point, Ian, the CGI, some of the flying books and these things that you have seen in Poltergeist and other movies, and it looks good. But it's funny. I'll just make a quick comparison, and then we can talk more about whatever else is there, including the actors. But it struck me as I watched both of these movies in the last couple of years, The Exorcist and Carrie, that they had something very much in common with them. One is they probably didn't have the budget, so we all think the movie like that would get today. But I would argue that 2/3 of each movie, it's a regular movie. And then it goes crazy. And it only goes crazy in that last act. If you look at the original Carrie that Brian De Palma did, there's, the slow motion shower scene, and it's a little naughty and voyeuristic. And, there's the split diopter that uses very well when, William Katz's face is in the foreground and Carrie is liking his poem, and nice little touches like that. But by and large, it looks really basic. And you know what's great about that? You buy it. It's like, okay, I believe this now. The closest Carrie gets to using her telekinetic powers is she knocks off the ashtray when the principal can't get her name right.
There's also the kid on the bike, which we
right. But I mean, there are little
here,
things that aren't too much,
touches,
just like things like that. And they're kind of, you almost wonder if did they just edit as the hand flipped away as it flipped the ashtray? Like that's how the special effect was done. Same with what William Friedkin, as a famous documentary filmmaker, did with The Exorcist. He made it look like it was almost a documentary. I mean, it looks so sort of regular, and the hospital visits, and a lot of that sort of gritty New York, sort of realistic 70s kind of look to the film, until, okay, we're going to enter the room, and now Regan is taken over by the devil, and she's floating, and the room is cold. Holy crap. So it was a big surprise. Kimberly Pierce tries too hard to make this a horror movie from the get-go, and there's lots of weird looks and angles, and even, I mean, I knew we were in trouble. I'm just going to say this quick. I knew we were in trouble when they showed the poster and some of the first stills that came out. And of course, they had to make Chloe Grace Moretz look ugly. They made her hair really unattractive. They gave her the worst makeup that no teen girl in the history of America, even the plain Janes, would have ever done. It's like, really? You'd wear orange makeup? I don't think so. They just tried to make her look sullen and like she was just some bad version of AI or something. It's like, first of all, the problem is Chloe Grace Moretz is beautiful, full lips, blonde, curvy. She would be the most popular girl in school. So they miscast that role, where Sissy Spacek looked a little bit different. She was a little odd. She was freckled and had those big eyes and was pale to the point of being blue, and she was skinny and odd, and just she played kind of quiet and mousy because she kind of was that in real life. So you're just aware of all these things that, well, we can do this now. We can fly books and everything else around here because we can. Doesn't make it better. In some ways, I think the simpler stuff that they did was better. And then when you let all hell break loose, when the priests are fighting with Regan's body, writing terrible messages and crucifix and everything else, or Brian De Palma brings in the stylized, red lights and the split things, and, scenes are moving across and the other scenes are coming in, and everybody's sort of eliminated that thing. It's fantastic. But this one, that doesn't fall very well because we've had so many special effects before. This one just seemed like kind of another scene in a way.
That it's criminal, because I didn't necessarily want to see this remade, but watching that prom scene, I realized one of the things that was essential and missing was Amy Irving tracing the rope going up the rafters, and then you got Nancy Allen, like the close-up of her holding the rope and like licking her lips in
and those big blue eyes of hers, like so pretty and yet so evil looking at the same time. All that buildup, which was Brian De Palma's great credo, he could do that so well, and Kimberly Pierce misses all that.
So, Mark, what did you think of?
I just
Can I just say one other thing too before?
By all means,
one last thought too. Never underestimate the power of a great score too. That was one of the first times that I think American audiences, at least for an American-made film, had heard Pino Donaggio as a film composer in American production, which was so funny because here's this sort of simple small town almost story, and the score is so sweeping and romanticized and big, and that's was Pino Donaggio's claim to fame and all the stuff he did for Argento and some other people. But it was a great score, and
then just murdering that piano note at the end when the hand comes up. No matter how many times I watch the original Carrie, I am never ready for that hand.
No, and it build up and the music building up and that rope and following it, and you just, like you said, Amy Irving following it, figuring out, and it's all done in slow motion, and she's just, even where the door just slams her and she's saved, and she's so frustrated because now she can't help her friend. It's like, shit, girlfriend, you got out just at the right second. And there's that wit isn't in this film. It's not terrible. I mean, Julianne Moore is very committed to that performance that she gives. She's really given it her all. But anyway, those mistakes when you compare them don't help it. But Mark, your thoughts?
Well, thank you. Well, when I first saw this remake, I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stubs. I thought it was middle of the road.
Yeah, that's a great review, I think.
I didn't hate it. I wasn't exactly blown away. It's kind of like what you're saying is I think everybody, actually the performers and everything, are doing their best. Chloe is doing her best. You're right. She isn't exactly she's not cast properly in here for the type of person that we want Carrie needs to be. But at the same time, Chloe does her best to try to get the mousiness across. And I think it's successful enough for her. I mean, even it's the same reason. Well, let me just get the Christmas list out of the reasons of why I hate the remake of Psycho. But one of the main reasons, one of the main huge reasons. And no offense, Andrew Shearer, you love that movie. I have mad respect for you, sir. Love you, brother. But for me, I've tried it 3 times. I can't. But one of the main problems I had was the casting for the
Tony Perkins, yeah.
Tony Perkins.
Vince Vaughn is totally wrong.
Vince Vaughn is definitely not a Norman Bates character. They tried, but I'm just like, I don't buy it. You even trying to look creepy and not, you still look good, man. Even with the bad hair.
And he's big. He looks like a linebacker.
Right.
That man would walk in the room and nobody would be let him just drift into the wallpaper.
So yeah, through the makeup and the costuming and everything, they do their best. In Chloe's performance, she really puts her all into this to try to get from that mousy to that confident to that crazy at the end. And I think she succeeds in that. In all honesty, watching the second time, and also, folks, if you're wondering what our thoughts are on the original Carrie, check out episode 89 of the Spoiler Room, which we watched and did a coverage of way back when it was one of our first of the big 4-0 specials. But anyway, enough shill. But here, I watched them back to back tonight. Literally, I finished the remake and it said, "Oh, let's recommend the original." I looked at the time and go, "I have time," and played the original. And the difference in the end, because the performances, like you said, Julianne Moore, she does very well as the Margaret White character. It's a different Margaret White than what we got in the first one in many ways. Here she's got more issues. We see where that builds up and get a very larger understanding of why Carrie is the way she is. And it makes you wonder if there's a little more bipolarness going on played with the Julianne with Margaret White's character versus what we saw in the original iteration, done wonderfully by who's that?
Piper Laurie.
Thank you. That was handled differently. They were playing a different angle, and I liked that. I liked we had a little bit more of that relationship between the two, mother-daughter. Julianne and Chloe really gelled well together. Really looking at the differences between these two, it's in the director, and no offense at all to Kimberly Pierce whatsoever, but looking at how similar the scripts are, I think why the original Carrie stands out more is because it's De Palma, and De Palma does his own thing, and his own thing is, I think in the hands of a different director, the original Carrie is received about as well as this one. I know it's a bold statement, but it's true. I honestly think the only real difference here is the style of the director. Kimberly Pierce puts together a fine film. I was entertained. I watched it the second time. I actually watched it. I enjoyed it a little better. I would have moved it up to 3 stubs instead of 2.5, given an extra half stub. I enjoyed it a little more than the first time because I knew what to expect. Plus, I actually think that the version on streaming, they did a few cuts in the Prom because there wasn't nearly as long of CGI special effects as I remember in the theater. So they may have done a little bit of, I don't know if they did or not, but it just seemed a little bit different. But
you know what I think? It's interesting too, because Kimberly Pierce is a good director of actors. She got great performances out of the whole cast in Boys Don't Cry. I mean, Peter Sarsgaard was a chilling villain, and Chloe Sevigny, who was not a trained actress at all, gave an Oscar-nominated performance and was very good. And of course, Hilary Swank came out of nowhere and gave the performance of the year, arguably.
Hey, she was the next Karate Kid, buddy.
That's right, she was.
and she was also one of the friends in Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
That's right. I mean, she was, kind of came out of nowhere for film audiences, I guess, in some respects, unless they were, kids who were seeing the Karate Kid, a continuation. But anyway, long story short, and nothing against Kimberly Pierce, because I think she's good at a lot of things as a director, including actors. She misdirects both Chloe Grace Moretz and Julianne Moore in this, despite the fact that I think their interpretation as actors isn't terrible, but it's not right either, and especially in comparison. Here's the difference. And you watched it just an hour or two ago, so you know better than me, Mark, but if I remember from last year when I saw Carrie again, Sissy Spacek plays it very much like a naive. She is not smarter than anybody else in the room. She is not knowing. She is not, like when the principal keeps calling her the wrong name. She never once does this. She's like, why isn't he calling me my name?
Mhm.
Julianne Moore, from the very first scene, she's in Carrie. And this is one of the issues with Julianne Moore as an actress. When she's playing dumb characters, her intelligence still comes through a little too much. It's the only criticism I have of May December is she's a little too smart for that role, because that woman is 4 tricks and she's still using the 4 tricks, where Julianne Moore has a lot more depth to her, and you can see it. And like at the end, when Carrie is mad and she's, they even show it all the times in the clips where she's kind of rangy and doing this stuff and like making the car crash. De Palma had the brains to say, no, she's in this spell. She's not responsible for her own actions. She doesn't know what she's doing. And when that car comes towards her, it's almost like a trapped animal. Like, of course the car goes, because it has to get out of driving her down. It's not like, I'm going to kill you in a really horrible way for what you did. And that's the difference. It's too knowing. And that's the feminist slant that I think is wrong here. Like, these are smart women and they were just abused by society and the whatever expectations of blah, 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 this, blah, 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 that. Yeah, that's kind of the story in Boys Don't Cry. This isn't that story. Carrie is a victim the entire time. She never becomes knowing. She never becomes a knowing villain. She never becomes a vengeful person who's out to it. That's why Brian De Palma, and he defended this, because one of the big criticisms of that first movie is like, why does the gym teacher get killed? She's the one who was so nice to Carrie, because Carrie doesn't see any difference. She is just, they're all going to laugh at you. They're all going to laugh at you. And that cornucopia, the family affair credits of them all laughing her. It might as well have been, 5 billion people on earth all laughing her. She doesn't differentiate who's not or who is nicer in the past. She's no longer herself. She's not responsible.
Well, that's one of the other things that I like Judy Greer, and I think she does a good job in the remake for what she's asked to do, but I think it's all wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's supposed to be a statement of like, because the gym teacher in the original is, she's feisty and she's nasty and she's headed up to here with these brats,
girls, yeah,
and it really comes through. Whereas Judy Greer is trying to be like everybody's best. She's like the mom who doesn't want a daughter. She wants a new best friend to think she's cool. Like that scene where she's at the prom where she's like dancing and stuff. And it looks like she's actually dancing with a high school boy. She like goes to see Carrie and there's this one guy like, hey, I thought we had a thing. Like the fact that the gym teacher dies at the end of the original Carrie, I think she gets caught between the bleachers.
That's right. Almost like
down her.
No, it drops part of the
almost like
frame. Part of the decoration.
It crashes right into her midsection.
Crashes right into her midsection.
Right. That it's
terrible.
It's horrifying, but it's also sad because, to your point, Jeff, this is unfocused rage. And I like that. And you mentioning the fact that she's in sort of this bizarre, fugue state where she's just like kind of gliding through the prom, like making her way outside. And it's just this really chilling shot of her exiting the building, the door slowly opening up and her coming out. And you can still hear the screams from inside because no one else, the doors close behind her after she leaves because like, no one's getting out of there. The magic's going to hold. It felt very real and horrifying. And I could feel the terror of being trapped in that gym. In this movie, it's like the entire point of this remake is just to get to the prom scene that everybody knows. Yeah. But then the prom scene is very unspectacular. It lasts for all of 2 minutes. And then you go to this overly extended scene back at the White House, where they kind of bring the element back from the novel, the way the novel opens, which is the story of the pebbles, the stones raining from the sky. But then they throw in this whole weird thing of Sue Snell is pregnant and Carrie senses the baby inside of her. So she throws her out of the house, but then gently leaves her on the sidewalk. I'm like, what am I watching here anymore? I don't know.
Again, Carrie's too conscious. She's too conscious. She's not that conscious.
If the movie had the guts to do it, they would have gym teachered Sue Snell at that moment. They would have flung her out of the house, and at least if they didn't kill her, they would have killed the kid, and that would have been one of the tragedies of like this unfocused rage having these this collateral damage. But it was just all too nice, and I'm jumping way ahead to the ending here. But as I mentioned, that last scare frame of the original Carrie, where the hand comes up out of the grave, and then you see Sue Snell like waking up from this dream. It's a nightmare scenario, but you've got the tombstone says Carrie White rots in or burns in hell.
Yeah.
We get that here at the end of this movie, but the only thing that happens is a terrible looking CGI crack comes up the tombstone face, and then it ends. I'm like, again, what am I watching?
And why go there? Why go to that ending when that isn't even in the book? That's something De Palma created for the film.
Which I think is, I think it's fine. I don't exactly
He wanted
remember
one last
how.
scare. He wanted one last scare. He felt like I really need to end this with something to get that audience to go out of the theater, kind of, you know, buttons push one more time.
And watching it this time, it didn't scare me. It's probably one of the first times.
Well, but it's because it's become lampooned by everybody and their brothers since that. You know, I mean, even the way Pino Donaggio cues that music, it's all this na na da dun 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 dun. It's like,
but I think
like almost comical in a way.
I think what it is, Jeff, is, and I think that's the reason it always gets me, is the hand comes up out of the grave, but it's not a horror movie hand coming up out of the grave. It just reaches up.
That's right.
And you're shocked.
Connection.
But the sting doesn't happen right when the hand comes up. There's a slight delay. So you're like,
yes.
Oh my God. There's oh my God. Like, yeah, it's a double jump scare and it's masterful.
And to that point into that's Sissy Spacek, whose arm is doing that. It's not a stunt double, because she said, this isn't a ghoul. This is this poor girl who's still trying to connect, and she had a little bit of a connection with Sue Snell. And like, that's what's the guilt in Sue's head, is that this girl was almost her friend, and she let all this kind of drift.
Well, in the remake, it's not a dream, because she's actually putting it on the gravestone. Robert Baum, info bombs with us. I literally just watching this. The difference is, in the dream, she's going to where the house was, and it's a for sale sign in the form of a cross that says Carrie White burns in hell, and it's got the arrow pointing down. Whereas
that's right.
In the remake, it's an actual tombstone and an actual grave that she puts down in it.
Flowers.
And
right.
And you know, I think part of it is the difference in because this was 2013 and that was 76. I think it's the difference in 40 years, almost 40 years of filmmaking approach to the same material, of how horror is approached. Mm-hmm. One of the things that the 70s, and why us horror fans love the 70s films so much, is because they were doing some of that shit for the first time. There wasn't a formula. There wasn't a book of tropes necessary. There was a book of ideas that you stole from Alfred Hitchcock. But I mean, if you're going to borrow from Alfred Hitchcock, anyone, you borrow from Alfred Hitchcock when it comes to horror. But that's about the extent. That and cheesy 50s monster films, and that, mm-hmm. So as far as horror goes, it was still, and we've had this discussion before, kind of finding its way. You had all these guys who were able, like De Palma, to put their mark on things because there was no real standard. No one had any expectations for horror films. Mm-hmm. So you could really do free reign. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that filmmakers don't have that today, but as we know, the system has changed. Money, how it's handled for a film has changed. Producers, how they handle films for directors have changed. And I think part of what hinders Carrie, the remake, not necessarily is anybody, like I said, involved as in, and I don't know the backstory and I haven't found any trivia. Maybe there isn't, but I would suspect possibly why it is the way it is because some producers go, hey, we got to leave it for a sequel. So instead of doing a hand in a dream sequence, you got to have her put the roses down on an actual grave and have it split just in case, to imply that maybe Carrie didn't actually die. She's still alive in her. You know what I'm saying? You know where I'm thinking though with that. In 2013, producers are still thinking like that. There's a more modern sensibility, good or bad, of how to make a film. And we got to leave it open. It's the very one thing that bugged me a little bit about Godzilla -1. Yes, I brought it up again. I apologize. But it's the one thing that really bugged me with the Godzilla Virus one is the last scene that they put in there. I was like, no, yeah, it is beautiful. You just have to put one scene in here, not to spoil too much for you. Sorry, but there's just one scene in there where I'm like, why do that? That's a little bit more of a modern take, you know. Whereas in the 70s, when De Palma's making this one, not only let's not over. There is the male gaze. There's also the difference between a male and female director, which is very obvious watching these back to back. But that's also 40-year span of how film is handled. The opening is literally opened with full frontal nudity of ladies who are supposed to be teenagers. Now they don't look like it. They're 25. They're in their mid 20s. There is no way you're buying any of these people except maybe Sissy Spacek. And even then, that they're actually teenagers. Okay, but it's implied. It's the 70s. It's creepy. Yeah, watching them back to back. That is the one thing that is a big difference, though, is how the lens handles those characters.
But you know, it's in. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. You're going to say something. Yeah.
No.
No, Ian, were you going to say something?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I use the word creepy. I mean, I think I understand it, Mark, but I think that's honestly, it's a reframing based on, 2016 onward.
No,
I mean,
yeah,
it's movies. They just used to revel in naked female bodies.
They would.
But that's the thing is, like, if you're going to remake Carrie, one of the things that is missing from this movie is sexuality. It is about a girl becoming a woman and coming into her own, and the way sex is used and the different relationships between the characters. It's just like it's sort of a problem in that it doesn't feel so much like a meta commentary. I think in better hands it could have been. Like all the girls in the Carrie remake, including Chloe Grace Moretz, no matter how like bad orange straw hair they give her, they all look like Instagram models. Like Sue Snell is like a Swedish goddess. I'm like, what is going on here? But yeah, I do miss that edge, that danger. Like the locker room scene when Carrie opens, you feel like you shouldn't be watching it. Like you feel like you are getting a peek in, almost like something out of Porky's, like you're getting a peek into the woman's locker room, but then something horrible happens, and it is almost like a critique of the male gaze in so much as, yeah, there's these beautiful, hot, young, attractive women, and then there's the reality of being a woman and like the mess of the period, and not only that, but how cruel they can be to each other, knowing that Carrie is a little bit different than the rest of them, and they plug it up, like throwing tampons at her, and the genuine horror on her face, and like being in shock in that moment. Chloe Grace Moretz, she's acting the entire way through, whereas Sissy Spacek, I almost believe, like something you said, Jeff, it's almost like they're shooting a documentary of a truly disturbed woman, playing this part.
You raise both of you raise an interesting point, and I think it actually ties back into a little bit what we were talking about before we got into Carrie about both Spielberg and Martin Scorsese. Is I think a mistake that filmmakers make today that they did not learn properly from the likes of Mr. Spielberg and Scorsese is they want to so empathize with the story and the characters that they fail to see the forest for the trees. And I think good filmmakers tend to stand back a little bit and have a certain amount of subjectivity, as well as, dare I say, cheek in how they're showing it. I'll give you an example. You mentioned Alfred Hitchcock, Mark. And what I love about Alfred Hitchcock is Hitchcock always had a little bit of wit because he knew that we were watching a movie. And he acknowledges that we were watching a movie and that it's a fake kind of scenario. Like, we're the audience? Wait a minute. We're not in the story? No, we're watching a story. Kimberly Pierce treats this like she's in the story almost. And the only time she separates from that is like, well, I'm going to do all this razzle dazzle that I can do with special effects now because of our modern times. But she's in there with it and like, I'm relating to these people. And maybe that worked in Boys Don't Cry. I think maybe in some respects it did, because we had to understand where these two women were coming from who come together in this very odd predicament. But Brian De Palma, to your very point, Ian, introduces that by saying, okay, the movie starts in a girl's locker room. Shit, who doesn't want to see what goes on in a girl's locker room? So he shows us, and it's pretty damn good. And you're right, the 70s was all about, we can show nudity and much more open world we live in, sexual revolution, et cetera, et cetera. But then here's where he's cheeky, and you just hit the nail on the head. Okay, you think this is beautiful, and DiNaggio's score is very sensual, and it might as well be a scene from Emmanuel. When does Sylvia Christel walk in and go, I want to touch both of you while you two pleasure me? Bring the gym teacher, and I like older women. Then he shows like, oh, these idealized, beautiful young nubile girls, they're vicious as fuck. They're evil, they're mean, they're just awful. And we think, oh, only guys are like that in locker room. No. And that's so De Palma says, hey, I'm going to go with exactly what we want to see as voyeurs, because we're not in this movie. We're watching this movie, and calls that out just the way Scorsese and, when they do their camera flourishes or editorial points of view, that's to remind us that they're watching with us. They're not in the film. They're watching the film as they're making it, watching it for us. And then De Palma takes that and even turns it on his ear. And I think actually does something that's almost feminist in his way. And that is by saying, you think that it's this beautiful romanticized Emmanuel scene. It's not. Girls can be just as vicious as guys. And I'm going to show you what happens. And it's genius. And yet it keeps a certain arm's length, which allows us to watch this. As sad as Carrie is, and as sad as Carrie remains a victim and naive throughout it with Sissy Spacek, there is a little bit of joy and humor in De Palma showing Piper Laurie's born-again Christian who's like, and I'm going to do this. And he's laughing a little bit at her, where, Julianne Moore's this way because, she got pregnant out of wedlock and she's brought up wrong. And I'm sorry for her. Yeah, that's the way you want to play this, Kimberly? Go right ahead. But that's not really the right tone. And even King does that in his books. We're always watching at these people a little bit more rather than being them, because they're in this thing that is so fantastical that we have to. And that separation is necessary. It's crucial. It's part of the whole point of view of the narrator, whether it's Stephen King, Martin Scorsese, or Brian De Palma.
There's the key scene where Carrie decides that she's going to go to the prom, and she has it out with her mom. And I think in the original, I can't remember if in the remake if it's the levitation scene or what, but in both movies they have the line like, I'm going to prom, mama, and things are going to change around here.
Yeah.
Chloe Grace Moretz delivers the line. Sissy Spacek embodies the line in a way that she's like just figuring out how to stand up for herself against her overbearing mom. And when she's at, things are going to change around here, there's almost like a twinge of delight, like glee, in that she's figured out that she can get the upper hand while also scolding her mom, which she's never done. And she's like, this is weird. You get the feeling that she's like, where is this coming from? But I'm just going to kind of go with it. And I'm kind of terrified of my own powers, all in just like the subtleties of this delivery. I might be reading way too much of it. But I
don't think you are, Ian. I think you're watching a girl who knows she has a little bit of rope. She doesn't have a lot of rope. She's not savvy enough to get a lot of rope out of that. But when she says like, they're breasts, mama, and everyone's got them, after the mom goes, your dirty pillows are showing, which right there, I mean, the fact that De Palma lets that line go and it's funny, and Piper Laurie makes it funny. And when she comes on at the end and she's like, we're going to pray, and she's walking like she's in a revival tent, there's got to be a little bit of distance from this, as opposed to, oh gosh, both of these women are going to end up dead and it's sad. Kind of, but not entirely.
Yeah, watching them back,
Pierce makes the mistake.
Watching them back to back, both of the deliveries for both those scenes were just fine with me, and they're both delivered with just as much power. If you watch them back to back, they're delivered almost exactly the same. I'm sorry, by watching,
but all the stuff that Chloe does before that, she's much more knowing, much more aware.
I understand, but those scenes both still have weight to them and are they've got meaning to them. That not one I wouldn't weigh over the other, because both of them are handled within the context of the film with just as much weight. The way Chloe does it, yes, Chloe is more knowing, but at the same time, both of them show the turn and dynamic of the mom and the daughter, and both of them have the same feel. I actually liked Chloe's a little bit better than Sissy Spacek's because it fit the character that had been built up until then. Now I'm taking this within the context of each one of the films of the setup for it. Chloe levitating mom is because, as you said, Chloe is more aware of her powers by now, and she's aware of what she could do. It makes sense that she's doing the levitation rather than Sissy Spacek's Carrie, who just pushes mom down to the bed, just pushes her down. That's
Kaboom.
it. That's
She tries
all
to get
she
up again,
does,
she goes down again, right?
which is creepy. Don't get me wrong, but you're still almost a little bit more frightful for the
But
mom.
also, to your point, Mark, and you're the expert at horror here. The levitating is too showy. It's again being very horror movie showy, and it conjures up the exorcist where being forced down the bed is like if she had the physical power to push her back onto the bed, she might have done that, but she just does it with her mind. It's smaller, and I think that's a key difference.
But again, within the context of the film, I think both of them are effective for what were presented in the film as a whole. Taking them what were presented up until that point, having Chloe's Carrie just push mom down would almost seem a bit weak sauce compared to what we had seen her do up until then. So it was very fitting.
I think honestly that's one of the problems, Mark. I mean, in this movie, Chloe's Carrie is like she's checking out all these books in the library and doing all this research, and everything is more about like the science of what's going on. Whereas Sissy Spacek's character, I don't know that would have really occurred
she still
to
does
her.
she still does her research.
She does a little bit
through her
there's so much more of a point to it, almost like these X-Men montages of her like grappling with her powers.
There is, but but again, we're talking two different periods too, though.
But
Carrie is set in a modern time where there's more information to her than what our Carrie in 74 had. She just had the freaking the Dewey Decimal System, which by God, that brought back horror memories right there. Just her flipping through the cards is scary.
Right.
Versus today, where she's got
literally. I take that point, but again, it comes back to why are we even bothering? Like, what are we saying about the modern era in the way that the characters are handling what's happening to them? You know, if you're going to, this isn't a new take on. It's not a new angle. If they had adapted the book, they could have gotten away with that. But this is just a remake of a movie that did not need to be remade. So if you're going to step up and say, I'm going to spend $50 million to remake a Brian De Palma classic, there needs to be something else to it. Otherwise, you can just safely lump this in with all the other failed, scraping the bottom of the barrel of the 2000s horror remakes that this falls into.
I am not saying at all that it doesn't need to exist. Don't get me wrong. For the 2013, I'm saying even when they first renounced it, I was like, why are they remaking Carrie? Okay, because the story had been already parroted a number of times and redone TV, as Infobomb mentions in the long text that he's been posting here, but he does mention that it's been adapted even to a failed Broadway tale at one point.
A very famous musical. It's one of the greatest bombs in the history of
where Betty Buckley, the gym teacher, played Carrie's mom on Broadway. You know, there was the Carrie sequel they tried to do in the 90s,
which I remember enjoying. I haven't watched it probably in 20 years. I think it actually turns 25 next year.
Yeah, it does. Like that. I think. Yeah.
That. At the very least, I think Emily Bergel, who played, I think the deal with that, because it was The Rage, Carrie 2. I think it was because the dad was like a philanderer. So this version of the daughter was like his illegitimate daughter from another mom or some nonsense who inherited his psychic powers. Wackily ends up being the target of harassment at a high school and gets revenge on everybody. But it's at like a pool party. And I think at the very least, the murders at that pool party outdo anything that's in the remake. They're nasty and they're cruel and they're kind of like you almost imagine them happening to you, as opposed to this thing which is over in 2 minutes. It's The
question that hasn't been asked properly by studio executives for really 30 plus years now, but to your point, the trend in the early 2000s of remaking these films just because, like, well, let's give it an updating for a modern audience. It's the same thing with Disney remaking cartoons as live action films. They think that they can improve upon these cartoons that, yes, true, some kids and some modern audiences will not watch because, gee whiz, Ariel was done in cell animation and not that computer animation that seems to be the thing that has to be done now in every kid's animated movie, until something like Spider-Man comes along, does something different, blends it all together, including tons of 2D, and then suddenly it's, oh, well, let's do that then as a remake or a style. But the thing that gets me about these remakes is, for me as a fan of literature, as a fan of movies, as well as an older person, I look at these movies and go, why are you remaking this? Like, if they were going to remake Psycho, I mean, Gus Van Sant, first of all, he's all about like sexuality in his movies, and there's very little real sexuality in the new Psycho, which he could have gone with, especially with his reputation. But if you really want to go back to the source material of Robert Bloch's original novel, there's plenty of stuff that Hitchcock threw out that he didn't use. For starters, the Norman Bates in that movie is fat and short and unattractive. And he cast a handsome leading actor off of Broadway as the lead, male ingenue, if you will. And that was his kind of counter to show that sometimes we don't realize that evil is not about the ugly or the cliche villains and stuff, but it can be a handsome leading man. Do that as the remake, Gus Van Sant. Don't just do it in color or say, well, Anthony Perkins was about 80 pounds dripping wet, even though he was 6'2". I'll cast a strapping 285-pound guy who could play a linebacker for the Chicago Bears. And go on. Yeah. No, those are wrong decisions. Why update Carrie to say, well, in today's modern times, those women would be stronger and speak for themselves, and we'd have more sympathy for the mom character. No, Kimberly, that's maybe the point of Boys Don't Cry, because I think it was trying to understand where the character's sexuality came from and why even the Chloe Sevigny character would accept that, because she was still looking for connection and intimacy. It didn't matter if it was a fake penis or not. It's the same story in The Crying Game. Yeah, that's the modern world we live in. That isn't the world of Carrie. Carrie is a spooky, weird kid who doesn't know what's going on. And she never does, even when she's got full faculty of her powers. And so why remake it? I mean, yeah, there's the whole town thing and the way it was assessed as like, what is this thing that happened? And it's almost a detective story, a procedural in its weird way. Fine, do that. But
I was just going to say, Jeff, I think, I would love to see at some point before I die an adaptation of Carrie the novel. I would also like to see, honestly, an adaptation of Psycho, because the Robert Bloch novel is similar in some ways, but it's also very different in others. I mean, like when I read that book, I'd seen the movie a dozen times and I love it, because it's Hitchcock's masterpiece. But the description of the shower scene, like at the end, it said, Norman Bates, or mother swung the knife and it cut off her screams and her head. That's how like one of the chapters ends. I'm like, holy shit, that was a surprise. That's something, again, unexpected, but it comes from literature. So don't remake, adapt. And there's a key difference there.
Well, Infobob's blowing up our chat here, but
let's check it out.
We've got it here, a number of messages in here. He said he didn't see the remake or the Carrie sequel in the 90s, but he does mention that he supposed the locker room scene from 76 is virtually short plagiarized of De Palma in the opening of the slasher film of Blowout. He says is similar to a Blowout opening, which I would argue, though, Robert, that
fun of himself.
He was making fun of himself, but at the same time, I would say that the shower opening scene has been used many times before and after De Palma.
He was also making fun of Dress to Kill there, because he started in the shower with a single woman. And the twist in
Dress to Kill.
And he also did the same parody in Body Double, where the woman is showering and then the vampire joins her in the shower.
That's one of my favorite scenes.
He likes showers, Brian does.
He likes showers. I like the one
naughty sex, dirty sex, but clean sex.
I like how he handles the shower scene at the end of Body Double, which is hilarious.
Yes,
it just takes the wind out of that entire sensual scene of like the bell ringing off, and all of a sudden they're in the studio, and
Bronx Bray, and she's chewing gum, and she's talking about, my breasts are very, very tender, so be very careful. I'm on my period. Yes, again, period.
I love that. Body Double. Oh man. appreciate it now for a lot different reasons than I did when I was younger. Info Bob also mentions, did you know Spacek wore an outfit at her screen test that her mom had made for her? It was from when she was in creepy 7th grade.
There you go.
And
But see, that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Like, see, Carrie would maybe wear that dress and not realize she couldn't wear that 2 years into high school.
And Psycho is another remake with Julianne Moore. Absolutely. That's all we're gonna. We've talked enough about Psycho remake already. I'd like to not talk about it anymore because we're still making it relevant.
I like the fact that Robert Bond wrote another remail.
Yeah, remail. I like that. That actually is
Freudian slip there, Mr. Bond.
Yeah. He thought Body Double was a rehash of Blowout, which is probably similar. I mean, De Palma after a while starts, borrowing from
he's
himself.
inspired by the rancor about his previous film.
He's inspired by De Palma. Brian De Palma is inspired by De Palma later.
For my next film, I'm going to answer all my critics who criticize my last film.
Yeah. and his regular slyball Dennis Franz was in it.
Yes,
Dennis Franz.
You tell Ted from out of town to get in town, in downtown.
Yeah. So it from Bob, great stuff. But as far as the remake goes, again, I watching them back to back, I appreciate the remake a little bit more than I did when I first watched it, because I looked at it as a movie by itself. I tried to cut myself off from the original, and the reason I watched the original right after it was just to see, okay, where, watching it back to back, you can see a lot of the similarities in there, and it is always the main number one question that I hear when you're doing a remake is, what are you bringing new to the table? And you'll either get a studio that allows a filmmaker to go, okay, tell a fresh story, maybe throw some, similar elements into it, but tell a fresh story. Look at what happened to the Planet of the Apes series. You're doing Planet of the Apes. Everybody's going, great, another Planet of the Apes. We saw that Tim Burton last one. What do you do? And it ended up being a lot of people's, including mine, a great trilogy. I particularly like the Planet of the Apes trilogy, far better than what you would have expected something like that. But what they were doing is taking a very classic film that could have used a bigger budget, because as classic as Planet of the Apes original is, it still is campy in many ways. And you look at it, go, okay, because of the budget, even though it's a great film. So they upgraded that with the Planet of the Apes here and telling it kind of a prequel trilogy before the original, and not kind of the requel, as my friends would put it. And if you heard, is the requel, which is it's not quite a remake. It's played as a sequel, but if you watch it, you go, okay, that's kind of a remake.
I would also say that those films were very different interpretations. If you're going to do a redo on Planet of the Apes,
exactly.
You go from Rod Serling's version of it, which was kind of like a little played in some respects like a big screen Twilight Zone.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Into something that's a much more sort of modern action picture with all of the implications of commentaries about modern war and discrimination, et cetera. But it's definitely of its time, just as the 69 version was of its time.
One of my best examples of how to do a remake, two of them actually. One of them is Dawn of the Dead. Let's look at 2000 Dawn of the Dead. Cult classic. You're touching Dawn of the Dead. Come on. That that's revered as like the peak of the film, even though the original Night of the Living Dead, a lot of people, including really love.
The parody of the Mall Walkers is hilarious.
Right.
It's like, he was ahead of the curve on making fun of a rampant sort of blind consumerism.
So you find out, they're making a remake of it. You're like, okay, great. And wait, what do you mean LL Cool J's in it? What are you talking about? And it ends up being,
isn't that Zack Snyder?
Yeah. And it's Zack Snyder. I mean, early before
and James Gunn, I believe.
And James Gunn.
That's right.
Yes. And you look at that film, and
the zombies could run, could they not?
And zombies run. Yeah. I mean, there's so many things going against it that when it came out, people were like, okay. And horror community is like, oh, you know what? That's a pretty damn good movie. That was a decent interpretation. The other one that I will say a remake, if you're going to do it, I liked it except for the last few minutes, and I've said it before, and I apologize to my listeners, but I will. The Crazies is another way to do a remake. You take a low budget cult film that is good. in its premise,
Mhm.
didn't have the budget to really do. So most of that film is told from one room with a bunch of different characters, because they didn't have a lot of budget for it, but it's a cult classic. And you take that concept, you put money behind it, you tell the same story from a different perspective. So the crazies with the remake, when I'm a Timothy Oliphant fan anyway, I love him.
Oh yeah.
Put him in it, and you tell the similar story, but you're telling it from the outside of the room. You're telling it from the people who are out there where the zombie outbreak is, versus a scientist in the room or on a farmland, a very small scope. You put it on a bigger scope, similar story in a similar world. They could almost coexist with each other. You put in scenes that are similar, like, the people caged and the people from the outside cage. You get similar scenes, but bring something different to the table. And you guys are right. When it comes to remakes, why are you touching films that are classics? Psycho, Carrie. I mean, you could rattle off a number of other classics that were remade for whatever reason.
As a rule of thumb, I think studio executives should not make remakes of classic, like just iconic films, because they're just going to, the chances of you equaling it are going to be rare. And if they are going to make remakes, I think they would be better off remaking, for lack of a better term, series or maybe franchises. We've had many Draculas, we've had many Sherlock Holmes, we've had many zombie films, many takes on Frankenstein. I'm not saying that those necessarily have an exclusivity to them. God knows they do remakes in theater all the time. Of course, you don't film that, so you can never see a modern dress Hamlet versus the classic Olivier Hamlet versus whatever. But if you would say, like, we're going to remake The Wizard of Oz, we're going to remake The Godfather, good luck, because there's no reason to. And why would you try to equal? You couldn't even equal perfection. And to your point, Ian, as many great films as Hitchcock has made, he's most famous for Psycho. Why remake that? Because it's in color? What?
Well, worse,
it's literally seen shot by shot, almost the exact same thing. It's ridiculous.
That was what was worse about. Oh, you opened up a can of worms now, Mr. Jeff York. You can. What's even worse about the Psycho remake is the fact that it's shot for shot, but you choose to change a few things, especially in the opening, that make no sense. Like in the opening, he's doing the exact same shot sheet too, which is, I'm like, zombie Hitchcock is coming out with rolled up copy of the script and beating the shit out of him. Going, why? Because, they're in the room in the beginning. She's having the affair in the hotel. That's fine. You've got to have thumping walls of other people having sex in there while you're there. Really? Why? You don't have to. It takes away from it. Doesn't need it. And then you're doing a shot for shot remake of Alfred Hitchcock. You get to the most famous scene in not just horror, but all of cinema. And then what do? You take creative license with that thing.
You did. You took creative license with that.
Yeah. Stabbing, and there's a raven, and there's maggots, and with each I'm like, what the fuck now? The one scene
so
you didn't have to touch. You could have replicated. I would have been fine. Now you decide to get creative. Thank you, Gus Van Sant. I'm sorry, that film just. Whew. Okay, I'm better now. Infobob. We'll go to Infobob's comment here. He goes, with a remake, you're at least guaranteed to get the entertainment reporters and talk show hosts to say how great it is, no matter how loud it is.
Well, the argument there from studios' perspectives, and it's so lame, and it's so expected, but it's like, well, it's easier to sell something that everybody knows than have to invest all this time and energy in something that's new. And they say all that, and then somebody comes along and creates something new that shows that if it's good, it will be successful. But they're just lazy because they think, oh, I'm going to pick a property that everybody knows, so I don't have to spend that much money on it. But then, you're defeating expectations, because people are walking in the movie theater kind of like, is this going to be any good? I'm here because I love the original, but I don't know. It's like, to go, what studio exec wants that reaction of an audience walking in to see their movie? That's ridiculous.
Infobob also said maybe the remakes of bad films, which is what I was talking about.
Yes.
So do not make remake Giggly. No, do not make Geely.
Geely, sir.
It's Giggly because it makes me laugh every time I.
There you go.
No, a remake of Geely, would not be better.
Or tell a story that hasn't been told before because they couldn't make it properly. I mean, one of the things I would argue is like, okay, even with Dune, and I think Denis Villeneuve has done a very good job with the thing, but it's really a series of books that almost needs the expanse of a miniseries and maybe a regular series, like 5 years. I mean, that was the thing that was smart. I think this one of the smarter things they did about The Walking Dead. It's like, okay, there's like 6 or 7 books already. It's got to be a TV show.
Mhm.
It's not a miniseries. It's not a one-off movie. We're not trying to condense anything. We're trying to, and they took enough creative license with it, of course, but those are the kind of things that I would be willing to pay to see as remakes. Tell the more expansive story of that, where the shorter version of it couldn't get to it. I mean, even though was it Paul Linfor who did the Watchmen sequel on HBO? Was that the?
Yeah.
It was very well done, but I mean, it was a different take on it, but it was also expanded to like I think 7 or 8 episodes. But for me, and maybe in 10 years' time, as well shot and in some respects acted as Zack Snyder's take on Watchmen was, that's such an expansive comic graphic novel that it deserves a 15-hour show of it to do the entire justice to every last part of it and the connections and the pirate story and how it all is. It's all there. I mean, it's storyboarded already. I mean, that's what Gus Van Sant could do, and then you have a good film, or a good miniseries. But don't remake a classic. Like if they for years they've talked about doing Gone with the Wind against why?
No.
What are you gonna do this better?
No, give me I will sooner take a remake of Battle Beyond the Stars than I will, because Battle Beyond the Stars was just a space opera version of Seven Samurai. Is all it was. If you watch that film, that's what it is. It's literally a space Seven Samurai, but it had some good concept. It had some fun. I would have loved to seen a budget behind it. Let's remake, though you probably couldn't touch it because of its cult status. And believe me, I love the original, a new Flash Gordon. Give me a new Flash
that's
Gordon.
also benefiting by being a comic book series.
Right.
Or a comic strip series as it was in the 20s and 30s.
Okay, well, I'll give you one better then. I watched The Creator. I really dug The Creator. The Creator blew through a wonderful world way too quickly for me. I watched The Creator and I go, I want a series of this. I don't want another Marvel series. I don't want to explore Nick, Fury dealing with the fact he was blipped. I want to watch The Creator because there are so many wonderful concepts and things and touched and ideas that you could do a series properly in that world and explore all kinds of things that they touch on. I'm like, this is a creative world. Spend time there and we blow through it. I'll even go Blade Runner. Blade Runner would be a limited series, but you could make it a police procedural of sorts. You could still do it. You could do it properly, I think.
Or do what they did with Watchmen. Take the basic concept of it and tell us a different story.
Right.
I mean, if there was any problem, I think, with the sequel is, of course, they have to bring it back to Decker and the whole implications of that. Where maybe it's just tell me a story about another detective in that time and what's his investigation about, and maybe it connects. But I don't know. I just think there's so much. It's like if they're going to bring back the X-Men now into the Marvel universe, please don't bring back the same 6 X-Men. You've got to expand it. There are 40 of them out there and dozens of characters in both the DC and the Marvel universe who've never gotten a film, never been in anything. Let's bring those people to it. Then maybe people say, oh, this is different. I'll go see it. But as much as I love Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and yes, I'll look forward to Deadpool because it'd be funny to see the dynamic between the comedic, banter and bitchiness of him and Ryan Reynolds together and see how they translate that into a movie. But I don't need to see Hugh Jackman play Wolverine again. He's a capable actor, a song and dance man. I'd like to see him do other shows on Broadway or see what else he can do. He was very good in Prisoners. He was, and that was miles away from a lot of things he's done.
Yeah,
and he was terrific in that. Do that. Do another Prestige. What are the scripts out there that he turned down to do 8 takes on X-Men over the years? That just confounds me. That's his career.
Well, I mean, the sad part is by the time they get around to making the X-Men movies, we're going to fall into the same trap of there's going to be a lot of the target demographic aren't going to be familiar with the X-Men because they're going to be like, oh, I'm not going to watch the Bryan Singer X-Men. Those movies are like 20 years old.
Yep, that's
So
right.
whatever they come out with is going to be the hot new thing. So we're going to see Wolverine again and Cyclops and Jean Grey, and they're going to continue to fuck it up because they just don't know how to
And it's
handle
all the
material.
studio execs know. It's like, that's the one with that guy with the claws, right? I mean, that's about their extent of X-Men knowledge is. As opposed to, do you know there's about 50 X-Men out there? I mean, if you go on any site that has any passing interest in sci-fi or an action adventure or modern Hollywood, they would tell you, just as clickbait, if nothing else, the 20 X-Men characters that deserve their own movie. Where are they? They haven't been made yet.
Yeah, well, and Infopop says, well, I don't know how much cred the 2018 X-Men film gets, but seeing Dazzler appear built without mentioning the name of it, a good aspect of it. Yeah, I mean, well, it's just like we didn't get a proper Gambit. Gambit, I think, is a fascinating character. I know some Marvel. See, I know some Marvel. I always enjoyed Gambit, and the one time we get Gambit was awful.
See, here's the challenge for both filmmakers, screenwriters, and maybe studio executives. Go into the room and don't say, who would we cast as the new Wolverine? Taron Egerton? Because he'd be shorter. Somebody told me that the original Wolverine is short. Oh, yeah. Don't do that. But if you walk in and say, it's one of the great properties and in sci-fi or horror, whatever you want to call a blend of it, that we could bring back is, what if we brought back Kolchak the Night Stalker? The show only lasted 12 episodes. It was only 2 TV movies. It spawned books and comic books. Okay, I'm the studio executive, and I'd say, okay, what's the angle today? Because if we're going to do it today as an update, you've got the internet, and reporting isn't the same it was then. And, the idea of a muckraking reporter, blah, blah, blah. How do you update it? Does he have a blog? Is he, is it a conspiracy theorist guy? You have to find that right in to justify doing it. Otherwise, it's just like, we're going to give Carrie a feminist spin because both of those women were misunderstood. Bullshit, Kimberly. Put the pen down.
Yeah, and so we'll wrap up here with Carrie 2013 celebrating.
See the way I bring it back, I'm trying to yell.
You brought it back very well. No, you're right. For me, watching it a second time, I enjoyed it more because I knew what to expect versus the first time going into the screen going, wait, what's this? And I appreciate it more. It's still not wow. It still has me thinking, why? I love everybody in it, but it's just one of those things where, like, okay. And then watching them back to back, seeing just how similar they are, you're like, wow, you added even less to this than I thought was when I first watched it in 2013, because I didn't watch them back to back. So I'm like, yeah, I think it's watchable. I think it's fine, especially for a modern audience who may not have seen the original. It'll probably hit just fine for you. And you might go back to the 76 one, go, what the hell is this? Because you're a younger audience, different perspective, yada yada. But it is a product. It is, I think, watchable. I didn't hate it as much as Mr. Ian Simmons here.
Look, I hate it when I first saw it. I don't hate it now. I hate the idea that someone might watch it and think this is what Carrie is.
Yeah.
And frankly, if they're like, well, I don't want to watch the 76 version because it's going to be cheesy. Well, you don't frankly deserve to watch Carrie. I'm serious, because there is that there are some goofy parts to, what De Palma did with that movie. I'm thinking specifically of the weird, like, slide whistle, Benny
there's the
montage of the tuxedo.
And
where it speeds up and slows down.
Or even like, how did that make it into Final Cut?
Even better, and I don't know why he put it in there, but at the very end of the climactic scene of the 76 one, Carrie is carrying the body of her mother she just crucified, and her one hand still stuck in the wall as she's carrying her to the closet. There is literally a cartoon sound when her head gets freed. I'm watching this. It's like serious. She's carrying her mom. I'm like, oh, wait, you forgot to remove the one hand. You forgot to remove, and I'm watching her carry, and she's still, Piper Laurie's still saying, and all of a sudden there is legitimately a sound. And I'm like,
wait. But it's funny.
What?
they'll criticize, like they think a 76 movie is cheesy, and yes, some of those parts are. But then you look at Carrie, and remember with step frame editing was a big thing
Oh
for a
yeah.
while. There's some of that in the 2013 version that Kimberly Pierce thought was pretty cool. That
Yeah.
and now to me that looks dated. It's like
Yeah.
that's as cheesy as some of that slide whistle shit that De Palma couldn't get rid of.
So, final thought with this one. I know what yours is, and I think you already gave it, but with Carrie 2013, any other final thought? Would you say someone should watch it at all, or just watch the original?
Just watch the original. I mean, unless you are in a class where you're comparing like remakes to the original,
Sure.
I can't think of like the two elements that I would recommend from this movie, which both involve the Chris Hargitson character, which I talked about at the top.
Right.
You could just look those up on YouTube
Mhm.
and watch those scenes somewhere. The
Mhm.
rest of it is a complete waste of time.
Yeah. Jeff, what camp are you in?
I'm with Ian essentially, but I also think when audiences ask why they would watch a remake, um, you have to ask them what are they getting out of it, and why can't they get their head wrapped around something that
Right.
is older or maybe not of their time or in black and white or whatever. But I just think there's an arrogance in modern audiences that anything that was made before 2000 isn't worth the investment of time because, oh, it's old, it's dated. It's like, yeah, and the world didn't start when you were born. So why not go back and read classic books or see classic TV shows? Or, I mean, you go to plays that are revival and, oh, yeah, this is your version of it, but it's still a play that was written back in, in the 1800s that we're still reviving, or Shakespeare's time or whatever. I just think that audiences need to get out of their own heads and say, it isn't about you or your decade or your generation. It's about art and quality and if it's made in there's many more films in the 70s that may have those slightly cheesy or dated elements to it that eclipse anything made in the last 20 years by a country mile. And I'm happy to, I mean, I can list you 50, maybe 100 great movies from the 70s, at least great in the sense of worthy of your time. And I have trouble coming up with 20 films to put on a 10 best list each year.
Well, Jeff,
and that includes the honorable mentions, 10, 20 and all that were like, yeah, those rated 3.5 or above.
well, I mean, just
And I'm not a negative person at all. It's just,
Well, real quick, just to pick up on something you're saying, Jeff, because I think it really solidified my issue, is when I was growing up, and this might be a generational thing that speaks to the sort of the narcissism, and yes, I'm the old man yelling at clouds, the narcissism of the current generation who thinks they know everything. Maybe that's all young generations. I don't know. When I was coming up, the idea that I could watch a movie or read a book or listen to a song that an adult or someone in authority or from a previous generation thought was cool or important, that made me feel like I was like getting a peek behind the curtain. Like,
yes.
oh, I can actually go back and watch this cool old thing that had an
Mhm.
influence over the modern art that I enjoy. Whereas now it's like, oh, that's old. To me, when I was like, oh, that's old. And a lot of my friends were like that same way. We would like hear about movies from, we were kids of the 80s, so we'd hear about like these weird movies. There's this movie called Easy Rider, or there's this movie called Psycho where this girl gets stabbed to death in the shower. Like, oh my God, I got to go see that. Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but I don't like it.
It's a great point. They should love the fact that they have discovered these pots of gold that maybe other people haven't had the privilege or opportunity to discover. But if it's only movies from 2000 on that they're going to watch because it's the same way they can't sell musicals. Musicals are corny, so you've got movies coming out like Wonka and Color Purple and every other musical that's come out that doesn't sell itself as a musical because that's the kiss of death for today's modern audience. You want that audience then? I mean,
no. It's got to be cut up into like 5,000 1-minute TikTok videos.
Two of the soundtracks that I've listened to the most over the last 20 years is Moulin Rouge and The Greatest Showman. Okay. Both musicals,
and those are modern musicals.
Those are modern musicals.
All ages went and saw.
And there's been other modern musicals. They've been a little more successful. They've faded again because everyone's like, "Oh, why are you making a musical about P.T. Barnum? He's an asshole." I'm like, I like the music. Okay, deal with it. It's actually got a good story to it. Yes, he was an asshole, and he even addressed that a little bit in the musical that he was an asshole.
It shows you how studio executives do anything. I mean, for 20 years, speaking of anniversaries, it's been 20 years now that I think it's been 20 years that Wicked has been running. And they're about to release the movie, the first half of it, this coming year. And that movie still fills every seat in the Gershwin Theater in New York, every performance. And it's the biggest theater in New York because young girls love that musical. So to say, well, today Generation Z doesn't get it and all that, they're just not trying hard enough.
No, well, you guys, your lawn looks great. Is that a
Get off it? Get off my lawn, Mark.
Is that a Kentucky bluegrass, crossed with Chinese longhorn there, green grass? No, anyway, just kidding.
Are you doing Carl from Caddyshack right now? Oh, that's pretty good, Billy.
Oh, you got a pool over there. Well, we got a pond and a pool, but you might like the pond.
Like the
I
think you would have to be our
I will say that as well. Though my sons, thankfully, they will watch an older film with me, and sometimes they love it, and sometimes they will go, "That was decent." Sometimes they'll go, "Eh." But they don't hate it, but they'll be voluntarily watching for me. And sometimes they're surprised. Like my son liked the Seven Samurai, which I didn't think he would sit down for a 3-hour Kurosawa movie, which is a bit of a slow burn. And he really dug it. And it made him want to watch The Magnificent Seven, which he didn't realize was and he loves Westerns now. And it's one of those things where, I understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, and we've had this conversation before, and not to beat a dead horse, Mr. Ed. Anyway, you watch those old movies though, and you can see where the modern stuff comes from. Because guess what? Your modern, revered, new filmmakers watched stuff before 2000.
Exactly.
Your Eggers, your Jordan Peele's, they've watched
the industry.
They watched the old films, and that's why their films are like that, because they watched those. They took the good stuff that they really liked from it, gave it a little bit of their own modern spin, and made it. And that's why their films hit, because they're still using the tools and the techniques that have been made. Hell, we'll go back and we're going to talk about it next year. Here's a shill. Next year's special, since we're ending our 10-year anniversary special here. Next year is going to be rated PC for pre-code. We're looking at pre-code films.
Ooh.
King Kong, the original King Kong, the techniques that they used for King Kong. They have two guys, and we'll talk about it more when we talk about the film next year, but they had two guys walking in front of a projector screen. You know what you use now? You have people walking in front of an LCD screen.
Right.
Same exact technique. Okay, folks.
Yeah, there's not a lot of difference from green screen and what used to be, the effects that they would do back then, rear screen projection and things like that.
Anyway, my get off my lawn moment is those techniques are still used today, and it's fun to see where they first used them. And
I'm not quite old enough to have seen those when they originally ran.
Well,
Mark,
no,
but I would be happy to join you for any of them, because you could talk about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the Frederick March Oscar winner for it, which Before the Code actually shows him, although it suggested, raping one of his victims behind the bed. And he's like, I can't believe what they got away with in those days.
So there you go, folks. If you're going to watch a remake, try to seek out the original as well, and just see where it came from. You might surprise yourself, and that's where we'll wrap it up. Oh, I got one more point. If you're good at Hollywood, if anyone from Hollywood's listening, you want a very intriguing, interesting material to borrow from, yes, hold on to your socks, Jeff and Ian. I've read books. Piers Anthony's Incarnations of Immortality on a Pale Horse. Do an adaptation of that. Do an adaptation of that series. That is an interesting series. I read that I was introduced by someone. Piers Anthony is doing Incarnations of Immortality. He takes different immortal characters and tells a story from their perspective, and it's all within the same world. The series of books are, but you get the same story from different perspectives. He covers Kronos, the god of time. The On a Pale Horse deals with the Reaper, and the basic concept is a guy happens to end up becoming the latest Reaper, and you learn that it is a job that is taken over by certain individuals when certain conditions happen, and it opens up this whole world where you look at Gaia, an incarnation of Gaia. There's a whole story revolved around her, around, like I said, time, around all those different aspects. It's I found it a fascinating book series, and it was great to see how he crossed over and how they all partake in the same world. But that is a rich story you could do a lot of interesting things with. So that's my plug there. And now I'm going to give my guests a chance to plug in this extended edition. Thank you so much for staying long. I know it's been a long night, but here is the license to shill for my wonderful panel, who are far more intelligent than myself, and that's why I have them on the show. So first off, we have Mr. Jeff York. The license to shill is yours. Please shill away.
I have the establishingshot.org. The establishingshot.org. I put it in twice in my intro there. That was a mistake. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I also write 2 essays about the film business for Pipeline Artist magazine online, pipelineartist.com. And I'm on TikTok doing 1-minute movie reviews that sort of blend thoughts about the film with my take on them, both through my pen as well as my voice. I show some of the characters that I use to accompany some of the reviews I do. So I think I'm up to 10 on those now.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be doing Reacher next, which is a very good show. Second season just dropped last Friday. And so just a couple different venues of trying different things, having fun with all of them.
Yes, definitely check it out. Wonderful art. Both of these gentlemen are also artists. In case anyone knows, I'm pulling back the veil.
Ian and I went to the same school, not together, but
Mr. Ian Simmons is also an artist. He does pen work, which is fantastic as well.
He showed me his portfolio.
It's wonderful work. I love when he posts his drawings he does for a day, each day for a month.
Yes, Ian, I have to see those. The Ian journals.
The Ian journals.
Ian,
speaking of Ian,
we need to make that a site.
License to shill, Mr. Ian Simmons.
Well, thank you. I am Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com. I'm also on YouTube. Look up Kicking the Seat and you'll find me there. And I'm also here every Monday. Although, Mark, next Monday is Christmas. So are we doing?
We're doing it Tuesday.
The New Blood. Okay, Tuesday. Good. I gotta mark that down.
We are doing Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. Our last episode of our 2023 season and the last episode of She's Thinking Out Loud month. So
the perfect elixir to all the Christmas sweets.
Hey, it's Carrie versus Jason, so
exactly.
You can't go wrong.
Exactly.
All right, but that's my plug.
I love it.
And Kicking the Seat, kickseat.com for Mr. Ian Simmons and all your Simmons needs. Wonderful reviewers there. In case anyone's interested at all, yes, Special Mark Productions for all your Movie Man needs. You can get links there to the TikTok, the Instagram, the YouTube, the podcast archive. I've just recorded 6 more reviews, which are dropping this week.
Ooh, nice.
And for our vinyl review show, which I occasionally do an episode for, called It's Vinylly Mine, we're doing our now yearly vinyl countdown, where we're reviewing 12 vinyls in 12 days from the 19th to the 31st as we count down to the end of the year. I review 12 vinyls in 12 days. I do this to myself every year. And so we got a lot of stuff there. I hope everyone has a safe and fun holiday out there, however you celebrate it. Please watch movies before 2000. And we got a great lineup next year coming up, and we'll cover more of that next week for our final episode of 2023, which is, Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. Not the New York one. We're not going to ever talk about Jason Goes to Manhattan. So
Jason takes Manhattan.
He goes to Manhattan. He doesn't really take it. He goes there.
Isn't the name of it Takes Manhattan?
Yeah, it's Jason Takes Manhattan, but he goes there. I never got the impression.
Which, think about that, for the newer versions of it, they're using a song, "I'll Take Manhattan," from
There
what,
you
the
go.
20s. I mean, come on.
See, and now we're gonna have Jeff York next year singing it for us as well. So there we go. Thank you.
King Kong, pre-code.
have a
He played with
happy
fate.
holiday and vacation, if nothing else, folks. And we will see you next week, Tuesday, for our final episode. Thank you all.